Very good morning to all of you. So today for our academic session, I thought I'll start with an interesting case and also sensitize you to an interesting method in clinical research. So I'll be talking about mostly what is called as a lesion-based study. So if you understand that the way neuroscience progressed was initially by studying patients with brain lesions, like Phineas Gage or Paul Broca, how he identified there was aphasia, and over time, then neuroscience had become more and more technology based. So we had MRI that came on, and we had functional MRI, and electrophysiology had progressed. So it moved away so much from lesion based studies to studying normal people and studying more of normal function with advanced technological methods. But now over the last few years, again, now we have some contemporary methods which can actually study. We can go back to the lesion based methods. So it may be just one patient, but it gives us so much insight into how basic neuroscience. So normally how clinical research works is that you take a particular disease, you do some study about, you can take a group of patients, compare them with a control and say something about the disease. It doesn't tell you anything about pathophysiology. So this method, on the other hand, is even if there's one patient, even if you have small number of patients, it will answer questions, basic science questions. So it's one of the few methods where you can start with a clinical problem and answer basic science questions. So we'll start by, as we go ahead, then you'll kind of understand how the method goes. So I'll be presenting an interesting case that we had of cortical blindness, and a patient could not see color perceptually, and he also could not imagine in color, but he was able to guess colors correctly in 80% of the cases. So this is a story of a 46-year-old lady who came to us with sudden onset of color blindness. So she said that she was completely all right, was normally seeing colors. She had some intermittent headache. She had transient visual disturbances. She had some flash of stars, and these colors had bright colors. These stars had bright colors. She's saying that she saw red, yellow, green, and then suddenly after that, the entire world became black and white for her. And she had come to the emergency, and then one of us actually had seen this patient, but she was outside window period. She had come actually almost a day. So she was admitted under medicine ward. And because of this interesting presentation, we went back and examined her and then did a lot of testing in her. So her phenomena that was quite interesting was that she says that everything is like watching a black and white television. So, and it's on either side of the field. And otherwise, she's completely normal. So she's able to walk around, negotiate. She's able to reach out. All her activities of daily living are all right. But except the fact that she's got loss of. So we did an imaging and we found that she's got bilateral occipital lobe infarcts. So we decided to do some psychophysical or behavioral testing. So we found that her visual acuity was normal. She was able to recognize all the objects that were placed in front of her. And we tried seeing whether she is able to perceive movements. So movement perception can be either tested at the bedside, where you can keep your finger on each field and ask them whether the finger is moving or not, or you can show them a picture of a GIF and ask them to identify which picture is moving with which picture is static. Or we have a behavioral task where we have something called as a random dot kinetogram. So you can actually show multiple random dots which are moving together as a group in either one particular direction, and the patient has to guess which direction the dots are moving. So she was able to do all of this correctly, and she was able to recognize faces. Despite the fact that she could not see colors, she could see shades. So Ishihara plates, she actually made no mistakes. So this is quite interesting. So I didn't know this, that when we read up, we found that people with cortical color blindness, about 30% of them can still get this Ishihara plates correct. So coming to color examination, so we actually showed them, so we have a task where we actually show color discs, and the person has to name the colors. And we found that she was unable to name any of the colors that we showed, and she was unable to match either. So that means she is not able to perceive the colors. But the way that we found that she's got blind sight is that there is something called as a two alternate force choice task. So you show them the color and you give them only two options. It's like an MCQ. You ask them, you show red and ask whether it's red or green. And when you give her a kind of a two force choice question, she was getting it right in almost 80% of the trials. So as you can see, you found that. So we found that she got it in 81.3% of the time. She got it correct, and this was when we did some statistics. We found that was actually significant. So another interesting thing that we had been trying a little while before this patient came was studying mental imagery. So mental imagery is something that you ask the patient to imagine in their visuospatial sketchpad. So you can ask them to imagine an apple or the house in which they're residing, or some common thing. So we have some tasks. I'll come back to how we assess mental imagery. So we think that, sorry?
It's total of 48 trials or total 48, like for example, if you have very less.
No, so we had a large number of
the number of colors also.
Yeah, so basically you can't give them, we don't want to give any complicated shades. So only the basic colors, but they'll come random. So it's a randomized method of giving the colors. So those are like done from published methods of testing color vision. So the coming to mental imagery, so we found that this patient was able to imagine objects, in motion. So a common thing that we are able to tell them to imagine is a train. They imagine that they're in the railway station and they have to imagine that the train is coming from one direction and going to the opposite direction. So she herself was surprised that she was able to imagine the train. She was able to imagine the train moving, but she was not able to imagine in color. So we found that she is unable to imagine in color. So deficits in mental imagery, we think it could be that the visual association areas are involved. That's why. So we found that even patients with lesion involving the primary visual cortex will be able to imagine things, and that's because the visual association areas are the ones that are responsible for mental imagery. So now I'll be talking a little bit about the methods that we do. So in what we do in a lesion-based study is that we have patient symptoms, and then we take the patient's symptom and then we try to correlate it with the patient's MRI. So the patient's MRI, or it could be not a single patient, but it could be a group of patients as well. So this patient actually is a patient who came with some numbness of the leg. But ended up having a lateral medullary syndrome, and it has never been not commonly described before. So we couldn't explain. We looked for a lesion elsewhere. We couldn't find another lesion. So then this is when this kind of method is actually useful. So then what we did is there is thanks to contemporary neuroscience, there's an entire wave of something called as the open neuroscience. A lot of neuroimaging data is available free and open source. So one such thing is something called as the MNI template. So MNI template is a standard or a template brain where all imaging data can be put into, and it's common across a lot of research platforms. So if I say that one particular area is involved here, you can compare it with all other studies also, and that makes comparison across methods, comparison across studies. So you can actually extract fMRI data and then apply it on the same template, and you can take our patient data and apply it on the same, and you can do statistics along within the MRI data itself. So that is how that is possible. So what we normally do is we take the patient's data and put it onto this template. The next step, what we do is that we can actually do what is called as indirect functional connectivity. So thanks to this human connectome project, there's a lot of fMRI data of normal individuals available along with behavioral data as well. So you can take a group, say people take somewhere between 100 or even 1,000 normal fMRI data and average them, and then you can take one particular point, take this patient's lesion and see what all this area is connected to in normal people. So that is called as a lesion network, or you can call it indirect functional connectivity. So if you take this particular case, there you want to see what all are the areas this lateral medullary lesion is connected to. So you can see that this particular area is connected to all of these areas in the brain based on normal functional connectivity. But all of them are not strong connections. So you want to know that what are the significant connections. So there are some statistical methods that you can apply, and we call it some statistical thresholding. So when we did that, we found that is actually connected to the leg area in the sensory cortex. So that is how even though we had a single patient, we found even though he had an atypical presentation, we were able to do this method and find out that this particular area is mapped into the leg area of the sensory cortex. So that is how the lesion symptom mapping and lesion network mapping actually works. So this is a little bit of background on how we went about things. So same thing we went and did for our color blind patient. So we find that this is the lesion. So it's involving the inferior part of the occipital lobe extending into the medial temporal in some areas. And what we did is we mapped it onto the template brain. And here you can see that So this is how it looks in the template. The template brain is usually a T1 weighted imaging. It has a 1 millimeter resolution. So then what we did is that we wanted to see whether it's involving the visual areas. I mean, it's as a neurologist, it's obvious that it's involving the occipital cortex, and that's where the visual areas. But from an objective scientific point of view, we want to know whether it's actually involving the visual areas and what are all the Brodmann's areas and what are all the visual areas that are involved. So what we did is we overlapped this with the visual networks of the brain. So there was a study. There's a study in 2015 by Wang et al. Where they actually published an atlas of visual areas of the brain. So they actually scanned a lot of normal individuals and showed them different aspects of visual percepts and found which areas of the brain was activated. And actually what is seen in color here are all the visual areas, and the lesion is seen in red. So you can see that the lesion is sitting within the visual networks of the brain. So here you can see the red is the lesion, and the colored areas like the green, blue, and the purple areas are all the different. These are all the other visual networks of the brain. We'll come to that in more detail. We can also overlap it with the Brodmann's atlas and find out which area and the number of voxels that are involved in each of these particular parts. And you can actually do statistics. You can do a chi-square or a t-test depending on this with your behavioral scores. But here we had only one patient, so our goal was not to do statistics, but just to find out what all areas of the brain was involved. So next we wanted to see why was this patient color blind. So just to prove that from a scientific point of view. So what we did is that we took the certain areas in the brain that are specific for color perception. So there is a human area V4, or also called as HV4, which is the commonest color area of the brain. And here we can see that is coded in red. So, and all of these fMRI atlases are probabilistic atlas in the sense that what is red has got the highest probability of coding color, and as you go outside, the probability drops. So here you can see that the pink is the lesion map, and then most of it is actually overlapping the color area. So you can say that is why this patient is having impaired color perception. So this is not the only color area. We found that there are some other color areas also. There's also called as VO1 and VO2. These are also areas that are involved in perceiving color. So here again, you can see that our lesion is involving those areas as well. So you can see that it's extending, the pink is actually overlapping with both of these areas. So telling us that this patient has got a deficit involving the color areas. And the color area is actually part of the ventral stream, which is involved in processing objects, and it's involved in the Watt pathway. But one thing we found that this patient did not have any difficulty in perceiving movements, or did not have any difficulty in imagining movements. So we wanted to prove that this is actually not involving the movement area. So here what we did is we actually mapped the human areas, movement areas. That's called as one is MT and MST are the two movement areas of the brain. So from the atlas, we actually mapped the human MT, and this is the MT, and here you can see that this is the pink is the lesion. So here you can see there is no overlap between the lesion. It's not extending into the movement area. So again, we looked at the other movement area, which is called as the area MST. Here again, there was no overlap between the lesion and the movement area. So telling us that this is one of the reasons why this patient did not have deficits in movement perception. So I told you that all areas of the brain are strongly connected to other sites. So it's that I just told you that the lesion is overlapping. What about the lesion network? So that's what we did. So what we did is that lesion connectivity mappings, or the indirect functional connectivity. So what we did here is that we took the lesion and found out what are all the areas that are connected to. So like similar to what I showed you before. And this is without applying the statistical threshold. So you'll find that there'll be some amount of connectivity to most other parts of the brain. But when you do some statistical thresholding, then you'll get only the significant connections. So here what is coded in orange is the lesion connectivity of the patient. So in the sense that, or you can call it the lesion network. Earlier what I showed you was the lesion, but this is the lesion network, or all the areas that are significantly connected to the lesion. So here again, you can see that there is not much overlap between the movement areas and the lesion network, thus telling us why movement was preserved but color was gone.
These movement areas and color areas, they are fMRI.
Yeah.
Mapped using fMRI.
Yeah. So what they do is these are task-based fMRI. So what they do is they show them. They call it a localizer. So there's a 10 second in which they show you a color. then the 10 seconds they may ask you to do an alternate task, or some 10 seconds you may be just doing a resting task where you're not doing anything.
But the connection is actually not fMRI. So, for example, there's an area in temporal lobe and there's an area in occipital lobe. Both are lighting up, but the connection in between is not determined by the scan.
No. So generally the connections are not determined by the scan at all. So connection. So what the MRI is telling you is that the correlation in the signal between 2 points.
2 points. That's all.
Yeah. So those.
So, for example, like optic chiasma to optic of the to the or the LG nucleus to the occipital lobe, that we cannot know.
No. So normally, so see, there are two ways of looking at it. One is like if you're LG, you can actually look at connectivity between the lateral geniculate and the occipital lobe if you're doing a task based. So in a resting state, there may be some connectivity, but it may not be as the same as what you're seeing in. So, but what the data that we are using is all, some are resting state, some are functional. So the color areas and the movement areas are all task-based fMRI results.
So there was another group which was looking at all the connections anatomically. So they are like slicing brains at one this thing, and then they are like trying to find out all the neurons.
Yeah, so that is called structural connectivity. So we do that also. I mean, this particular patient we have not done.
So that data is available.
Yeah, that is also available. So that basically we have data on that is basically tractography. So,
yeah.
So it tells you that what all areas are structurally connected to other areas, and that data is also openly available. So when we studied this patient, we were not doing that at that point, but now we are doing that.
For example, even a patient who has a lesion in the optic nerve may have some color perception problems. That we cannot differentiate using this.
Generally, optic nerve in this regular MRI, we don't look at functional connectivity. But if you're looking at tractography and all, then it's possible to look at the optic nerves. So in this particular case, we found that there was no overlap between the movement area and this. And there are a lot of studies that say that structural connectivity and functional connectivity there's a strong correlation. So this is as good as having structural connectivity in most settings. Yeah, so now coming to the interesting part. So this patient had blind sight. So this is when we were able to answer some basic science questions. Till now is all run-of-the-mill kind of thing. So we have not proved anything new. So there's a lot of debate going on in this color perception research. So they're saying that blind sight is the inability to guess or subconsciously know what the color or object is without actually consciously knowing. So this patient was not consciously able to see color, but she was able to guess correctly. So another common blind sight that they were used to study is that people will not be able to perceive movement, or people will not be able to see a particular object. But when the object comes into the visual field, which is blind, there'll be a saccade towards that. So there were two groups that were competing. So these are actually basic science researchers where they were actually studying marmosets and monkeys. So they were injecting lesions so they were injecting a chemical to destroy V1, and they were studying blind sight in monkeys and in marmosets. So, and also they were, so the one theory was that the pulvinar was involved in blind sight, and the other is says that the lateral geniculate is involved in blind sight. So how does this happen is basically that even though the primary visual cortex is not there, information regarding color, movement, or perception is reaching the other visual association areas, bypassing the primary visual cortex. So this can happen. Anatomically, people have studied using rabies virus, like virus tracers, and they found that lateral geniculate directly goes to area empty, and it can bypass primary visual cortex. So you can subconsciously perceive movement, even though you don't consciously perceive it. But there's hardly any data for color or object perception. Another thing that they found is that the pulvinar, superior colliculus, recently, I think last year, somebody's published an article saying that superior colliculus through the inferior part of the pulvinar projects to the area empty in the other areas, and that can again help in. So these two groups are actually debating, saying which is a proper way, and but there's no data on how color perception happens. So that is when we actually looked at a couple of areas. So we looked at the lateral geniculate nucleus and the pulvinar. So here what we did is we just looked at a large area of the pulvinar and also the whole lateral geniculate body. We manually mapped it, and then we looked at the functional connectivity. So like how we did a lesion network, we looked at the connectivity of the pulvinar and the connectivity of the lateral geniculate. So if you look at this picture, you can see that what is seen as yellow is the lesion network of the patient. So it's obviously extending more than the lesion. So that's why it's the network. And what is seen in green is the connectivity of the lateral geniculate nucleus. So you can see that it's actually connected to multiple areas. A lot of these areas are actually within the visual network. So you can see that the green is actually overlapping in the visual network. So that is the regular connectivity. And what is seen in blue is the connectivity of the pulvinar nucleus. So what is interesting is that there are certain areas in the lateral temporal lobe that and the frontal lobe in which there is no overlap between the visual network, the lesion network, and the pulvinar or this. So you can see that the pulvinar and the lateral geniculate are bypassing the primary visual pathway and directly going to the association cortices. So this is an explanation why there could be blind sight. It's not that just one is happening. Even in normal people, there is some amount of connectivity between the lateral geniculate and pulvinar to the association cortices. And once you have a lesion, it's possible that these could actually increase and these connections can get strengthened, and that is how patient may be having blind sight. So then we wanted to look at pulvinar in particular, because I mean, then we tried both lateral geniculate body and different subnucleus of the pulvinar. So there was a large data set. I think this is published last year in Neuroimage. They looked at different areas of the pulvinar and looked at their connectivity. In fact, these guys have published this data openly. So there's a dorsomedial cluster, lateral cluster, anterior cluster, inferior cluster, and then a ventromedial cluster. So what we did is we analyzed each of these connectivity and we found which areas these are connected to. So another thing that we found is there's another group that did a color naming task and published that data online. So we found that so what is seen in red is the activation of a color naming task. So you can see that whenever during the fMRI, when patients were asked to name a color, this particular area, also some other inferior areas which is not shown here, were activated. And you can find that and the lesion network does not extend into this area. So basically it's not connected to that area. But you can find that the inferior pulvinar nucleus, which the data got from here, so this cluster is actually projecting to the areas that are involved in color naming. So it's possible that this patient was able to guess colors because the connectivity of the inferior pulvinar nucleus to the color naming areas. And that is how we were able to postulate that maybe this is how blind sight for color is there. And this data is not actually, this has not been studied in any other context. So we actually did, I'm only showing you the significant results, but we actually looked at the connectivity of the lateral geniculate. We looked at each individual cluster, but we did not find any significant overlap. And this is very similar to the data on monkeys. They found that the inferior pulvinar nucleus or the ventral pulvinar nucleus is the one that is connected to the visual association areas. And that was mostly to area empty. But we are the first ones to demonstrate that it's involved in color perception as well. So now coming to a little bit on mental imagery. So mental imagery is something that used to be studied extensively in the 60s and 70s, and then they said that it was too subjective and there was no objective way of studying it, and it had died down. But again, it's now come up. Why is it come up? Because now we are able to do more contemporary lesion-based studies based on them. And in neuropsychology or cognitive neuroscience, one definitive way of proving things is called as double dissociation. Double dissociation. So what we just showed is dissociation between color and movement. So one patient was not able to perceive color, was able to perceive movement. But if there's another patient who's perceiving color but not movement, then you can compare the brain areas and then you can figure out how which areas are involved in each. So that is one way to prove causality in cognitive neuroscience. So what we did is that we have a whole battery of mental imagery tasks. So one that I told you is we asked them to imagine the train is crossing from one side to the other. We asked them to imagine they're in the beach and they're able to see the ocean and the waves. Or we asked them to imagine some common or uncommon objects in front of them. And so we found that here you can see that we demonstrated a double dissociation. So patient A was able to have a vivid mental imagery despite cortical blindness, in the sense that he had an old occipital infarct. So V1 was damaged, but despite this, he was able to imagine in color. And but when he was asked to imagine the train, he was not able to imagine the train. So he's just seeing the train in all colors, but the train is not able to move at all. And this was true for all other tasks that we did. And here you can see that the lesion is actually involving. So here we did only the lesion, not the lesion network, but the lesion itself was involving the area MT and the area MST also. But it was sparing the color area, which is V4. So you can see, so that is one form of dissociation. But to prove causality, we need something called as a double dissociation. So we had another patient. So this patient was able to imagine movement very well, but was unable to imagine in color. And here you can see that the V4 area is involved. Here, but movement area on one side was preserved. Movement area on the opposite side was involved, but one side was preserved. So by this, we were able to demonstrate that there's a double dissociation in for movement and color perception for mental imagery. So in summary and conclusion, so you can have bilateral extrastriate lesion of the cortex involving the areas that process color in the brain can result in cerebral achromatopsia. So we were able to prove using a lesion-based method. And we also showed that indirect functional connectivity can be used here. And we were able to show the dissociation between color and movement perception. And so we could explain the phenomenon that we observed using neuroimaging data. And we showed that lateral geniculate and pulvinar have projections to the association cortices. And so we were able to show what is already known about the two theories for blind sight. And what is novel was we were able to demonstrate blind sight for color, which is not so commonly described. And we have also postulated a mechanism for that using neuroimaging data. And also we showed that studying mental imagery is something that is, even though it's subjective, can be robust when we apply it along with neuroimaging data. So, yeah, thank you. Any questions?
In 43 blind patients,